One of the largest crowds we ever had in the Armory in the early 70s was the James Gang. And they were huge. We didn't know it when we booked them. I had ticket outlets in Albany and Monmouth, Independence, Corvallis, Woodburn, Mount Angel, Silverton, Stayton. I had tickets outlets at a lot of places because the kids in those areas seemed to come to those dances in those days. And they were dances. They were, never put a concert on, they were all dances. And what happened is I took those tickets out and I dispersed them to all those outlets one day, about 9,200, even knowing that the Armory only held 3,200, but I didn't want anybody to run out of tickets. And so that's kind of why I did that. When I called the next day to do a ticket count, they'd all sold. 9,200 tickets sold. So what do? Well, you don't sell any more tickets, and people show up, and you let them in. You take their tickets and you let them in, and then after the main crowd's there, you just open all the doors. They can flow in and out, back and forth. We didn't sell any alcohol, so there was no alcohol monitoring going on. And so kids got to go in and out. Some of them went out and sat on the grass on the side, and they sat everywhere. The place was full. I mean, it was full. Got some bad press, and but there was nothing you could do about it. And so that taught us one thing. From then on, I never dispersed more than 3,200 tickets before a show. But that one was just huge. James Gang was just huge.
Ed Dougherty grew up on the family farm just north of Salem, Oregon in Hayesville. Born on November 17, 1937, and the youngest of 3 children, Ed was like most other farm kids in the 1940s and 50s. They learned how to work hard at an early age because the demands of keeping a farm profitable so the family could survive were high. Every family member worked, and like the majority of other farmers, the Doughertys were poor. Ed wasn't exactly a standout scholar in grade school and at Sacred Heart High School, but the big farm kid made his mark in football and track, proving his impressive athletic abilities. He married his childhood sweetheart, Janet Larson, on July 11, 1959, and a college scholarship earned him a teaching degree from Oregon College of Education in 1960. Ed took a teaching position at Salem's Waldo Middle School in the mathematics department, where he quickly became a favorite teacher of the students. It was during this time that he would soon begin his long, successful career as a concert promoter and become a Northwest entertainment phenomenon. The seed was planted by the students at the school when they would come up to him and say, "Mr. Dougherty, there's nothing to do." And in the early 1960s, listening to rock and roll music and dancing were the things nearly every teenager in America wanted to do.
A lot of people to this day ask me, how did that Armory thing get started, the dances at the Armory in the 60s and the 70s. I was a teacher at Waldo Junior High School, and the kids kept coming up to me saying there's nothing to do in Salem on the weekends, no dances to do. And I ran the warehouse at Kelly Farquhar right next to the Armory during the summer. And they were having dances there, but kids were kind of flooding over on us, and there would be some fights going on. And I remember I went over and saw the Army manager, and I said to him, you know, that's dangerous. I got trucks coming in and out of here, and I can't have kids overflowing from the armor over to these streets here on Tile Road. And I said, we got to do something. He says, well, if you can do a better job, do it yourself. So I met Dave Olson, who worked there also, and I said, what do we do? And he says, you know, there's all kinds of bands. Maybe we should put one in there and give it a try. And so I said, who would you recommend? And he said, well, the Whalers. They had #1 tune, Tall Cool One, back in the 50s, 59. And they were a fairly big deal in Seattle, and they were being played here on KBZY. So I called up the Whalers and said, would you come down to Salem, Oregon, and play this dance about Christmas time? So Dave and I sat down and decided to do a show, and so we brought the Whalers in. But something happened between September and our show, is that there was a car show there. And they brought Paul Revere and the Raiders in. And people showed up, and when Paul started playing at the car show, people started dancing in the aisleways. And they had to stop him because there was danger in the cars because of the things around the cars, and they were afraid things were going to fall on him and hurt him. And so they stopped him. So Dave and I thought, well, maybe we should try Paul Revere and the Raiders. Well, it was too late by then. We had the Whalers coming, and it went very well. We didn't make any money because we didn't know what we were doing, for one thing. I never will forget the night before the show, I couldn't sleep. And that's not, I mean, I can sleep through anything, but I couldn't sleep. It just, what am I doing? I'm doing something I don't know what I'm doing here. It scared me so bad. The next night at the show, I didn't go inside. I stayed outside and took tickets because I didn't understand music. I thought those guys were all kind of weird. You know, I met them when they come and we help them get unloaded, but they were weird. You know, they're musicians, they're weird. And here I am in my tie and suit, and I had other teachers helping me, and they're all going, boy, this is a different thing. And so it was a different experience for me to do something like that. And so the next one I had was about a month or 2 months later. I brought Paul Revere and the Raiders in. And that was huge. People loved Paul Revere and the Raiders. It was huge. He was so poor, we had to go to Portland to rent his uniforms from the costume store. He didn't even own his own stuff that way. He was still driving the old hearse around.
I remember distinctly when we played the Salem Armory the first time. Ed was the man to, if there was a dance or any kind of thing happening in Salem, he was the man. And it just seems like Ed wasn't that much older than me. We were like on the same wavelength, you know. And but he was a whiz kid promoter. He just knew how to do it. And he threw a dance at the Salem Armory featuring Paul Revere and the Raiders. And whatever he did it right because the place was packed.
Dave did that one with me, and after that he went away to school, and so I went off on my own. I knew I needed an opening act because some of those groups would only play 1 or 2 sets, which is an hour and a half, and my shows usually ran from 8 to 12. There was a group in town called the Chevelles. They were just starting up. They were a bunch of kids from Sarah. And I'd heard about him. Jack Van ran him. It was his group. His kids were in it. And I called him up and said, would you like to open up for a Paul Revere show? Of course, they went nuts. It was a big deal. And they did open up for Paul Revere, the second show we had at the Armory. And of course, they become instant stars. I mean, the kids loved them. They were they were a local group that had a lot of talent, and they did very well. There were other groups before them, but they were new and upstarting, and so that's why I went with them. There was another group called the Fidels. They were very good. Steve Westfall, great band, very good band. And I did use them down the road some, and they, like I say, they were a good band. But back in the early '60s, there weren't that many local bands that that could handle that. So the Chevelles are the ones that sprung off and became the big local group in the early '60s.
The band, the Chevelles, started in about 1963, I believe, in the fall. All the guys in the band were from Sarah Catholic High School here in town. There was a band of people made out of people from the 9th grade class the year before and the sophomore class. And at the end of our freshman year, the freshman band and the sophomore band got together. And we put the band together and we picked the name the Chevelles.
The 6 of us got together. We started out by playing instrumental, because I don't think any of us, I won't say Joe Smith and Stan Steiner didn't have good voices or any of the others, but I know I didn't have much of a good voice other than singing some background. But we got together and we started playing instrumentals, kind of surf sound and what.
Eventually we added a singer named Jim Taylor. So the band then became Jim, Stan Steiner, myself, Mike Van, Craig Van, Gary Phillips, and Rick Seals, the drummer. So we kind of moved along and did that for a year and a half or so, probably, and had a nice little following and did some important things with Ed that, we wouldn't have had an opportunity to do otherwise.
I believe our first dance job was at Sarah. It was that fall. I think maybe about our second one or so was down at the Knights of Columbus Hall in Salem. And my understanding is that's where Ed Dougherty, you might say, came into our lives. And he was moonlighting, I believe, as a bartender there at the Knights. And we were playing upstairs and he came up to see what was going on, and he met my father, who, although my dad was not officially our manager, he was sort of, since we were minors, he always went to all of our dances. And so I guess they talked, and that's how we got to meet Ed Dougherty.
Without Ed starting his business, our business as a band wouldn't have been nearly as good, because along the way we played with several people, the Whalers, Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Anytime Paul Revere was in town, I think we played as his opening band. We also played as, since we were the local, we were always the opening band. My father used to say, if you go 50 miles out of town, you're a professional, but when you're in town, you aren't. So we would open for Dawn and the Good Times and Merrily Rush, and just, basically a lot of whoever came into town. Just a few months before the group broke up, we had a gig up in, I think it was Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma, and Jim couldn't make that one. He told us right out as soon as we said, hey, we have this chance. He says, I can't be there. He was doing something that weekend. So we were trying to figure out what we were going to do. Well, for some time, 2 other Sarah graduates by the name of Bill O'Brien and Jerry Meyer had been hanging around our practice. And so I don't know who did the formal whatever, but we asked Bill if he could fill in that. And so we practiced for 2-3 weeks, whatever it took, to get songs that he could do. And he was our singer up at Pacific Lutheran.
So I said, sure. So they took the first dance I ever sang at was at Pacific Lutheran University, which is outside of Tacoma. And I think we did Big Boy Pete by the Olympics. We did I Like It Like That by Chris Kenner. We did What'd I Say by Ray Charles. But yeah, that was the beginning.
When we came back from there, we talked it over, and it was kind of like, well, we don't want to lose Jim. That's not fair to Jim. But likewise, we don't want to give up Bill. He was, he added something. So at that point, what started out as 6 band members and 1 singer, and then 1 singer, now we had 2 singers. And as I said, for the last few months of the band, we actually would go out, and Jim would kind of do the ballad types, and Bill would do the hard rock, whatever songs we were doing like that.
So we put Paul in there, and then we split out. We started going to the VFW Hall, the Knights of Columbus Hall, and then I started putting dances in Lebanon and Albany and Lake Oswego and the Dalles, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger.
EJD Enterprises presents a giant cavalcade of stars this Saturday night at the Salem Armory Auditorium. Tommy Rowe, along with Tommy Rowe from Hollywood, the Sun Rays, B.J. Thomas, Alive 5, the fastest group alive,
Bears in the stand,
the Bards,
Willie Owl and the Pussycat.
all the action from 8:30 on Saturday night, Salem Armory Auditorium.
Let's go, let's go, let's go.
And I can remember being outside the armory and waiting to get in. We'd go early, and we'd wait, and sometimes it was hot, and the kids would line up, and then they'd finally open the doors, and we'd go in like somebody squeezed a tube of toothpaste. We'd just spurt in the door.
As soon as they opened them, man, we ran as fast as we could to the stage. I mean, we could sprint. It was because the first ones to the stage got to be in front, and our chins would barely be over the stage.
There was a lot of excitement, a lot of energy there, even before the groups came on.
And I can remember a couple of times when the place was totally packed, and I swear you could have lifted your feet and you wouldn't have fallen anywhere. You would have just stayed right where you were because it was so jam-packed.
We were in there like sardines, and then of course there was always one girl that would faint. But that was okay. We'd just shove her out of the way and move up a little closer.
It was the Mamas and the Papas, the Love and Spoonful, and the Shangri-Las. And the Shangri-Las opened, with Leader of the Pack, and it was all, we knew the songs. And then the Love and Spoonful came on. We knew all those songs because we were buying albums, and we had all the, and it was a huge crowd. But when the Mamas and Papas came on, they came out and came onto the stage, the whole back of the room just moved forward, and I remember his girlfriend, I was like standing right behind her, and I was struggling to keep my feet on the ground because literally it was just kind of pushing people up in the air. It was such a big surge, and she was screaming because she couldn't catch her breath, and her feet were off the ground. Literally off the ground because this push, and I'm trying to push back a little bit to save her, and my friend's in front of her. I remember her just, I can't breathe, I can't touch the ground, And it was that big a deal.
What made that armory so popular in the 60s and early 70s? That wasn't happening everywhere else. Those groups would not go play dances, but everybody heard about it, and I had groups call me saying, we want to play the Salem Armory. It was the place to play in the 60s and 70s. And so that's why we got a lot of the major groups in there that probably some of them should have played the Coliseum, shouldn't have played here. I remember the Dave Clark Five, they didn't want to play a dance. They got here and said, no, we want chairs in front of us. And after about 3 songs, they went, get the chairs out of there. We put some chairs down for them. They said, get them out of there. These kids are well behaved. They don't get up on the stage. They're dancing, they're having fun. So it worked, that seemed to work.
These were not concerts. They were billed as dances, and they were dances because a good part of the floor of the armory was filled with dancers. The kids were dancing, and the whole floor was full of these kids dancing.
Basically, they were all dance concerts. More dance than concert. But some of the groups that had a show, like the Raiders and the Good Times, maybe the front third of the audience was just right up next to the stage, just looking at, watching everything that was going on. And you were looking at them, and you were, you know, it was like, and then in back of them, everybody was dancing. And so there weren't really any concerts, you know, to speak of that were pure concerts.
And in those days, rock and roll was, to find a good rock and roll live band, kids would drive 100 miles, 150 miles, 200 miles to go to a good dance that would be fun. And the Salem Armory was a home run. Ed Dougherty knew how to throw a dance. And so kids would come from all around. I mean, they'd come up from Salem, Eugene, Medford, coming up there. They would come down from Portland, Vancouver. I mean, they would come from every direction.
Ed decided early on that if he was going to run these things, they were going to be clean and straightforward, and they weren't going to allow any alcohol in, weren't going to allow any kids who were obviously had something to drink in, and he had the dress code.
Those kids, when they came to the dances, they dress up pretty well. They had slacks on, nice shirts, sweaters. Some of them wore sport shirts and ties. And my theory was that they're going to act the way they dress.
Those of us that worked with him, and he himself took it very seriously. I mean, we wore suits and ties, and on one big show, I think one of the Paul Revere shows, we actually wore tuxedos the night of the gig. Of course, he had some kind of tie-in with Schrock's men's store in Salem, and we got the tuxedos for nothing.
As you see on the posters read, they were $1.10 or $1.25. People used to whine then and go, "That's an awful lot of money to go to a dance." I said, "Well, it costs a lot of money to put them on." But I never will forget one time I brought Sonny and Cher in, and I was paying them a lot of money. So I raised the prices from $1.25 to I think to $1.50, $2. People were upset, they were mad, they thought I was just a greedy promoter. Well, I am, that's okay. But to be called because you got to pay 50 cents more to see dance to Sonny and Cher, and they didn't want to play a dance, but once they got there, they were the same way. They had a great time.
The tickets were so reasonable. I mean, considering way back when, but $1.50 for a show like that, for total entertainment for a couple, 2.5 hours or so. I mean, sometimes I cashed in my pop cans, and back then I think they were only 2 cents.
You know, he was determined he was going to run a class operation, and he did. The kids knew it, and they all came clean and they behaved themselves, and that behavior was encouraged by his security crew, which had a tendency to be a little on the beefy side and knew how to handle themselves. People like Steve Gilchrist.
One of the fun things for me is that Ed always told me, he said, your security, your chaperones. And I would always use the term bouncer, bodyguard, and he'd just freak. You're not a bodyguard, you're not a bouncer, you're a chaperone. That's what you are, you're a chaperone. Well, I guess we're chaperones that used to throw people right off over fences and everything else.
I remember my very first dance that I went to, and it was the 11th Spoonful. My mother would not approve of me going to these dances, but the word chaperone was always in the little flyers, and we talked about that, and that made the deal.
I think all the parents felt really good about it because it was run clean, didn't tolerate any drugs or alcohol. It's really strange. You know, he used locals for security, and everybody knew everybody. And so, you know, if you got in trouble, not only did you and Ed know about it, but your parents knew about it, and everybody at the school knew about it. So, I mean, it was really pretty well, I wouldn't say policed, but controlled.
And the police, as you'll see, Sergeant Kelly, he was great, God love. Those kids liked those guys. I mean, they came, and when they said, do this, they did it. I did not see a fight. I understand there were some, and my official chaperones said there were some, but I never saw them. But all I know is if there was, I saw them go into the office, and we called the parents. all those years, I never saw a guy get booked or go to jail, a kid. Call the parents. And it's kind of funny, the parents would say, what, my kid's there? I didn't even know he was there. But once they came there and they saw how all the other kids were acting, their kids showed up in trouble when they got there, they said, well, why? And then one parent said to me, he says, well, you know, I'm missing a case of whiskey in my garage. He goes right over to the kid and says, you know where that is? And he says, yeah, it's in the back of my car. And so it was interesting to watch the play between the parents and the police. And then the kid would go out the front door with Dad by taking him out by the ear or whatever.
One of the things Ed demanded of us was that we treat everyone as we would want to be treated. That was absolutely his mantra. You don't, you know, yeah, you're security and you need to keep the peace and keep people safe and people need to have fun. He did what he could to accommodate to make it fun for everyone. That was his thing, to make this a fun thing for everyone. It wasn't just about making money, but you know, obviously you got to make some money because you got to pay for these groups. But it was fun, and that's what I remember most about it. It was fun, and everybody had fun. Not just the crowd, but the band, and they enjoyed playing for Ed. And he was, you know, just a great guy to work for.
It was pretty demanding, you know, what he wanted and how it worked out, and but then you had to be. I mean, you're running a business, so you know, he told you what he expected, and I think one of the first times I ever worked for him, he says, you know, I'm going to screw you now and then, but at least I'm going to tell you when I'm going to do it. You know, in other words, he wanted something for free. Yeah, he'd tell you, and that was the way it worked. And then later on, you got a pat on the back or a little more on your check the next time or something. You know, it's just the way it works.
And the Salem Armory was one place that we worked a lot with Ed. And you can probably still hear us. The sound's still bouncing around in there today. It's one of those real live, really loud places to play. And we were extremely loud back in the day. So Ed was great. Ed's always been a real favorite of ours to work in the Northwest.
One of the big spots to play was the Salem Armory. And there was this guy named Ed Dougherty. And he was this guy that kind of had a twinkle in his eye. It's like he knew stuff that other people didn't know. I mean, I don't know if he gave us some clues or some ideas on how to perform, but it was always like a big deal when you went down and played for Ed.
He had his ear tuned, and he had a sixth sense about which groups were making, because there was a lot of rock and roll bands up in the Northwest in those days, and he knew which ones would draw a crowd, which ones was making the best, making the most noise. And so he just had a good, had his finger on the pulse of what teenagers liked. And I think he might have been wrong occasionally, but I don't remember. It seemed like he was always right. He always had it figured out. He knew which bands to book and which bands to stay away from, or which bands to maybe make a multiple battle of the bands, you know, get a bunch of them together. But he was always making it exciting.
I stayed away from the football games, the basketball games. I stayed away from the proms. I stayed away from the YMCA stuff and the YW stuff. I'd kind of shoot around them. The best time for me to do stuff was during the summer, because the kids were out doing, and then it would be around Christmas time when the kids were home. We'd always do a show after Christmas, the day after Christmas. And that worked out really well because kids didn't have anything to do. Plus, at Christmas, they got new outfits and money. And so they had money to go to those things.
You know, and you know, we filled the Armory up, and Revere filled it up, and you know, all the local bands he put in there. He had great crowds. You could always, you know, go to an Ed job and know that you were going to be treated well. So, but Ed was a big softie. You know, Jan was the tough one behind the scenes. She was, yeah, she was running the contracts and made sure that everything was to the letter.
Jan Dougherty, who's just the greatest lady. She was, you know, I don't know if Ed, she was kind of the backbone. I mean, just made sure everything went clockwork, and everyone was in place. And you know, Ed was the general ramrod, but Jan was kind of the captain of the ship, so to speak.
I learned one thing about the students at Waldo, that once I started doing those, I took a different image with the kids, because then it was like, Mr. Dougherty, who's coming next? Now, Mr. Dougherty, who's coming next? Mr. Dougherty, can we meet him? Can we go backstage and meet him? And yeah, they would meet him, and especially like Paul Revere. He was just a cracker. He liked kids, and he did everything he could to make it. Marilee Rush, Angel Lemoyne, she liked to meet kids. So if we thought that the group was right, we'd let them go back and meet with them, and they thought that was a pretty big deal. So yeah, it did kind of change the image of the old teacher. You know, maybe he understands what's going on. What made those so successful in the 60s is that the top name entertainment we had there, because nobody else they wouldn't play dances anywhere else they play in Salem. I still walk around going, why was that so successful in the 60s? Because the names we had, I mean, where else could you go and dance to Sonny and Cher and where to the Doors? And I mean, it's just one after another. They just kept coming. I found out later on that in LA, all the groups that played out in the road came back saying, Salem's a place to play. You get everything you want. It's great. Kids are great. And there's no problems and everything's wonderful.
It was pretty magical. Probably, well, I loved them all. I loved the big stars, you know, Sonny and Cher and the Lovin' Spoonful and the Mamas and Papas, Dino, Desi, and Billy. That was an interesting concert because we had to sit down on the floor and there was like this big T-shaped stage. I don't know what that was all about, but they came out, I guess maybe they sounded better there rather than on the big stage.
I had a Portland show on Friday night, so I stuck them in that and then I brought them to Saturday. I know that when I picked them up at the airport, we were driving into Portland to get them their rooms, and Kissin' played their new hit. And Dino goes, I didn't sing that. And the other says, that's not our record. So I drove directly over to Kissin' and I said, where'd you get that? And they said, it just came in the mail. It's their latest release. They had to go in the back room, listen to the record, learn the words, so they could play it that night at the Coliseum, because they hadn't heard the record. I said, well, you sang it, didn't you? They said, you know, we probably did. They'd run us to the studio and we'd do 20, 30 songs. I got a call from William Morse saying that they had this new act called Sonny and Cher, and they wanted me to use them this summer, and so I said, okay. So I flew down, and they were living in a garage, in back of a garage, and they hadn't even had any records out then, that early. And so I went and I met them, and they were dressed in what they were wearing in those days, and then met them. So I said, yeah, I'll put them at the Oregon State Fair because they're different. And so I put them on as an opening act. They were not the main act. Of course, by that time, I got them here. I Got You Babe was #1, and they were in the top 10. I think there were 3 or 4 of their records were in the top 10 by the time they got here. So they were huge. So the act that was going to be there decided not to come. They just said, hey, they're the stars, not us. And so I got them here, and they flew into Portland and went up and picked them up, drove them to Salem. That was when I got pulled over by a cop for speeding, and he walked up to the car and said, you're speeding? I said, no, I'm late to get these people to their hotel room. And he says, well, who's in there? I said, Sonny and Cher. And he says, can I have their autograph? And he got their autograph, and he left. That was kind of a funny story because even Sonny was laughing about that one, going, anywhere else they'd have given me a ticket. I said, well, here in Oregon, you're a star. We did a rehearsal, got them to the hotel room downtown, and picked them up and brought them out there for the show. And it was huge. I mean, there was a lot of people there. Because by that time, they were a pretty big deal. In fact, they flew out of here the next day for New York, and they were on Hullabaloo, which was a big show. And so I hit it on the head. That was a good one. Picked one that really did very well. Dave Clark 5 had their own, they had a DC-5, and they called it a D5, and they called it DC-5. They landed at the airport, and they were late. And I had 3 or 4 other acts on before them. And it got down to be, there was an hour left before they were supposed to go on, and they landed at the airport, and they went on in time. They were so organized. We had trucks there, you got them in, they were just great guys. A guy by the name of Neymark was a promoter out of Chicago, called me up and he said, I've got this package of the Everly Brothers and Johnny Cash put together. Oh, and by the way, there's this guy on it by the name of Tex Ritter. I said, not the Tex Ritter that just got out of jail. And he went, we don't talk about that. He's Johnny's friend. But Tex Ritter will be on the show, and also there were other names, other people on the show too. But it was the first time Johnny Cash ever played here. But I brought him into the fair quite a few times after that.
The Royal Guardsman, who had a hit, which was Snoopy versus the Red Baron. And Ed booked him for his Christmas show. And they showed up, and they were one of these put-together groups. Apparently the guy that promoted them, you know, made the record first, and then he got a group to do it. And Ed had contracted them for a 45-minute show. And they walked on stage and did Snoopy versus the Red Baron and walked off. And it said, you've got 40 minutes to go. And they said, that's the only song we know. And he said, go and do it. And they did Snoopy versus the Red Baron for 45 minutes.
I had Eric Burden and the Animals many times. Eric was a nice guy. You know, I had him as, first of all, he was the Animals. Then he came through as Eric Burden and the Animals. Then he came through as War. Then he came through as Eric Burden and War. And then he came through as Eric Burden. And we had the Lovin' Spoonful in there, and they went nuts over it. People went nuts over it. And personality, 1 to 10, 5, 6. You know, they were road warriors. You could always tell the road warriors, like, where's the dressing room? Where's the food? What time sound check? What time do we go on? I said, what do you care? Why do you care when you go on? You don't even wear watches. And they laugh, you know, well, we don't wear watches, so we have to. But they were good. They had a big fan club up here in those days.
Ed had the Turtles perform at the Armory, and he had us go backstage and take pictures of them, and that was really thrilling for us. You never knew when Ed was going to surprise us that we could go do that. And then Ed had the Everly Brothers, and that was a concert where we got to run first come, first serve up at the stage. And so we were so close, we were looking straight up at them. The pictures we took was just looking straight up, and so they'd spit on us, not on purpose, but while they were singing, and we were that close. So things like that were different than it is nowadays. You can't get that close to any of the bands.
Greatest bunch of guys in the world. We did our sound check at the State Fair, and they went, we always just go someplace and be left alone. I said, you want to go to my house? And I said, yeah, I got 2 kids. So they're out in the front yard playing with the kids. My neighbor drives by and calls me and he says, you'll never guess this, but I think the Everly Brothers are in your front yard. And I said, no, they are. By that time, we had about half the neighborhood came down to meet, and they were great. They were glad to get away, took them out to dinner, and they were fine. That's when they first started. It was really interesting because the Chevelles were the really opening first group. And as with any other groups, when there becomes some friction in the group, some of the members of the group came to me and said, we don't want to be a Chevelle anymore. We want to organize our own group.
Some of the band was starting to get a little disappointed in the involvement of Mr. Van, our manager, booking agent. And so Stan and I, along with Bill O'Brien, who had joined as a second singer for the Chevelles, actually approached Ed and asked him if he would be interested, if we left the Chevelles, if he'd be interested in booking us also.
So 3 of the original Chevelles broke away and formed the Live 5. And so we put that group together then, and then I started using the Live 5.
Instead of playing saxophone like I had in the Chevelles, I changed over and played bass. Bill was the singer, Stan Steiner was our keyboard player. We auditioned for a guitar player, and Jerry Meyer became our guitar player. And we auditioned a guy from South Salem named Craig Mortell, and he became our drummer. So that was the beginning of the Live 5.
So in that winter of '65, after I came back from school, we had about 3 months or so, I think, before the first thing we played.
I can tell you the first gig we ever did as the Live 5 was on March 20th, 1965 at the Salem Armory Auditorium. We opened for Paul Revere and the Raiders, and I think we did 2 10-song sets. But the songs, you guys all remember, were much shorter in those days. There were these 9-minute guitar leads and stuff. There was none of this Layla stuff. The songs were 210, 220, and you're out of here.
And then our sound system was so rudimentary. We had these old Bogan PA. It was just a little box, a little metal box. And it was just a circuit. You just plug in a mic and it went to these bullhorns that you'd see at a football arena or something, and just, horrible sound quality. But that's what everybody was using then, and nobody had monitors. Nobody used monitors.
Because Ed was our booking agent and his lead band, we got to open for any number of the largest acts that came through. We worked with people like the Animals, Mamas and Papas, Lovin' Spoonful. We worked with probably the biggest show at the Armory ever was the Sonny and Cher show. And it's hard to believe, but we had, I think, at least 5,000 people in the Armory for that show. And it was barely breathing room. It was so full.
And we got to know some of them, the Sonics and Paul Revere and the Raiders a little bit, especially Paul Revere and the Raiders, because we went, Billy and I'd see them every chance we got. And I really liked Drake Levin's style, and ask him what he was doing, little things he'd do on the guitar. And I especially remember one night, there was one little thing, he had that little thing, and I asked him, how do you do that? And so he threw that every solo he did that night, he did that.
Our biggest act of all time was at the Coliseum in Portland, because we got to share as one of the opening acts for the Rolling Stones.
We were so excited to be, because these were like our heroes. I mean, they liked the same kind of music, but they were actually writing great music too. And they had made it, they'd really done it. And so anyway, the stuff backstage, that picture backstage, that's just accidental, because Mick's going around, he was talking, I think one guy was a radio announcer and one guy was a promoter, and then Joe and I were just kind of eavesdropping or something, and somebody got a picture there. And then Brian Jones, I did talk to him. He came backstage when we were in our dressing room, because he saw what we were wearing when we played, and he just loved that outfit, the picture everybody sees of the barber pole pants, and they were great pants. They were made out of tent awning, and they're wide red, white stripes, and they were just indestructible. But anyway, Mrs. Dougherty made those pants, and she really labored over them to make that happen, because that tent material was not fun to work with. And anyway, she made those pants, and Brian saw that we were wearing those, and they were just right, you know, I mean, for the times. And he said, well, I'd really, your drummer's about the same size. I'd like to buy a pair of those pants. And Craig, well, Craig answered, because they're his pants. Anyway, he said, well, Mrs. Dougherty made these for us, and I don't think I can do that, you know.
During the time of the Live 5, we had an opportunity to record about, I think it was 5 or 6 of our tunes up at Jordan Music in Seattle, right underneath the monorail, which was kind of interesting. Quite an experience for somebody who was 16 or 17. Recording was always fun, because we got, even though it took a lot of takes, recording is not as simple as it seems. It always was a learning experience, and certainly in the middle of something, somebody'd make a little mistake that we'd have to say, cut, roll it again.
We had this one song, and it's called Who Knows? But it's spelled H-U-N-O-S-E. Because we didn't know what the name, we didn't know how to name the song. We couldn't figure out the name of the song. So if you ever hear it, I think it's on, there's a website you can go to hear our Live 5 songs. Yeah, we had the same mental block, so we called it Who Knows? Or Who Knows?
They wrote our first single, though. They wrote, Billy and Stan had written Yes, You're Mine while they were still in the Chevelles. And they kind of saved it to record if they ever had an opportunity. And so that was the first record that we did.
Probably, and I loved our local bands, you know, the Morning Rain, they were wonderful. The Live 5, oh gosh, the Moguls. Very favorite would be Dawn and the Good Times.
I remember we used to have a great big, Don Gallucci had a huge champagne bottle that was kind of part of our shtick. It seemed like we used to climb up in the rafters or hang off things, and it was an amazing time.
One of the first big shows, in fact, the first big show I went to was Paul Revere and the Raiders. My girlfriend from grade school. Of course, we were in our teens by then, and she wanted to go see Paul Revere, so our parents drove us there and picked us up, and it was a great show, and that really made me want to go to every show after that. After seeing Paul Revere, I wanted to see what else there was to offer, because there wasn't any live music in Salem for us to go and see. And when you could see something like that, that was better than going to some little place where there was a country band and a luncheon.
It was really a matter of timing and being in the right place at the right time. The band was fun, we were crazy, we were loud, and we had all the ingredients that it took to appeal to teenagers who liked a band that was a little rebellious and crazy, and that's what we were. And I think we kind of set the tone back in those early years of just being a little off center, not having to be so straight and narrow.
So we'd always, after the shows, have them come to the house when we lived in Kaiser, and they'd come in there, and Jan would always have food for them, because they didn't want to spend. I think Paul had money; he was just cheap, but you got to respect that, because he was trying to make it. But I remember that one time she said, there's 5 of them and there's 10 more coming, so there's 15. She says, how many hot dogs should I get? And I said, well, I guess she was on a budget too, so I said, well, get 50. They ate all those hot dogs before the other people even got there. We had to go get more hot dogs. They ate, they were hungry.
And we were just kind of the bad boys of rock and roll. We were crazy, and it worked. It worked, and the audiences loved it. That was right during the Louie Louie days, and you couldn't go wrong. You fire up into Louie Louie, the whole audience would be dancing to that beat. Louie Louie was the perfect song for the dancing that was going on at that moment in time. So you line up Parv and the Raiders, the British Music Invasion, Louie Louie, Ed Dougherty, Salem Armory.
By 1967, it just got bigger and bigger. I'd leave Waldo High School, Waldo Junior High School at 3:30, and drive to Portland, do a Coliseum show, come back that night, go teach the next day. Plus, I was teaching out the penitentiary a couple nights a week, and I was doing all the other stuff. I've always had 3 or 4 jobs. It was no big deal. And I came home one time, and Jan said, do you realize what our schedules are like? And I went, because she was working too. She was working for the state. And I said, yeah, well, we got to do something. The phone rings, and it's Ed Steidl from Meyer and Frank Company going, why don't you come and work for Meyer and Frank? I said, what do you want me to do? He says, we need someone to handle special events and advertising. Can you do that? So I went down to see Ed Steidl, who was president of Meyer and Frank Company. And he says, here's your office. And what were you making teaching school? And I told him. He said, I'll double that. And here's your office, and I'll double that. You got free phones, and you got all this stuff. There's one thing I want from you. And I said, well, what is it? He says, I want you to continue selling your dance tickets at Meyer and Frank's. In fact, I want you to pull them all in and sell them here. I went, why? He says, when you have a show, our kids' departments do their grosses they normally do during Christmas time. He says, we can't believe it. If there's a show, they come in and buy clothes. And that's why I got hired. So I had an office up on that mezzanine with the manager, the assistant manager, and me, who had the advertising, and I ran all my business out of that. And that worked pretty good. And then Jan also had the ticket operation there. Well, we had Steppenwolf so many times. They always did well. They always did very well. And John Kay is a good guy. He is a good guy. He'd show up at the gig, dressed with a t-shirt and jeans on. He'd go into the dressing room, and take some whiskey and pour it all over him. I never saw him drink. Never saw him take a drink. Pour it all over him. So when he went out, he just smelled like he's, And he'd go out and do these shows. He's drunk. He's crazy. He wasn't. It was all show. And so I booked him, and they said, well, there's this new group called Three Dog Night. They want to open the show, and they want $2,500. I said, well, I don't know who they are. They're not going to sell $2,500 worth of tickets. They said, well, take them anyway. So I trusted the guy who was selling them. I said, okay, so I took him. So Three Dog Night walks on the stage out here at the Salem Armory. Blew everybody away. They were fantastic. They were great.
They were so good. The harmony was so good. The vocals were so good. Everything was excellent. And they blew Steppenwolf out of the water, according to almost all of us, because they were better. When Steppenwolf came on, it was almost a letdown.
I think after Steppenwolf did their, played their main hit, I guess Born to Be Wild, or one of those, I don't know, I think it was over for them.
John Kay says, I'm not going on. I'm not going on. In fact, Newsweek came to town and did a story on it. I've got the magazine on it. It tells, they wrote up the story about Salem Armory with Steppenwolf and Three Dog Night. And they said, it was unbelievable. And they didn't want to go on. They said, we're not going to go on. They're too good. Well, they did, because everybody liked it anyway, because they were always good. But yeah, Three Dog Night. Then I brought them back 2 months later, and they sold out.
Expand your mind. The Vanilla Fudge in the biggest indoor show and dance in the history of the Northwest. EJD starts another fantastic year.
You better listen!
January 1st at the Salem Armory Auditorium, Salem, Oregon, the Vanilla Fudge. Also appearing the Led Zeppelin, the King Biscuit Entertainers, and the Heavy Company. This is the biggest show and dance ever, the Vanilla Fudge, January 1st, Salem Armory Auditorium, another gigantic EJD production.
We had a few other problems with the drug things in the bathrooms, but we got rid of that real quick too. Just put people in there and knew what to look for, and it pretty well come down to, you knew who the drug dealers were anyway. So the minute they come through the front door, you'd put the cops on them or our security guys on them. They would make it so uncomfortable for them, they'd either leave or wouldn't come back.
And then one time we were walking the perimeter, the outside perimeter of the Portland Coliseum, and there was this guy dealing. He was dealing. He had a big, whatever they call big things of pot, this big thing. And so I remember grabbing him by the back of the neck and hauling him into the restroom. And I said, you got two choices. You take the pot and you flush it down the toilet, and I let you stay in her, or I take your pot and we arrest you. And so what he was in total tears. He took his pot and flushed it down the toilet. This was a huge batch of pot, and whoever he was dealing for, I'm sure he had to pay a high price later on. But that's as far as it went with him. But he didn't want to get arrested, and I gave him a pretty good opportunity. But I knew what was probably going to happen to him down the road, so it was kind of fun for me.
No, the Doors didn't want to play here. I booked them on the end of the tour. They wanted to go to New York and hang out for a while. But their greedy agent said, no, you're going to play one more show. You're going to go to Portland, and you're going to go to Salem the next night and play the Salem Armory. And they didn't want to. They did not want to come to Salem, Oregon. They did not. And I knew Morrison can be a little difficult. The road manager showed up. He said, he does not want to meet you. He doesn't even want to be around you. He's upset with you because you made him do this show. I didn't make him do anything. His manager booked, or his booking agent booked him in here, but that's fine. So they went out, did their show, went out, never met him, handed the manager the check, and he went down the road. Then I had him about 2 months later. I ran the football field at the University of Oregon, and he'd just come off that thing in Miami, where he dropped his pants and mooned the crowd. Well, the sheriff came to me that morning of the show and said, now, if he does that here, you're going to jail too. And I said, oh, but if I drop my pants, you're going to take him to jail too? And he said, don't be a smart, whatever. And I said, so when he got there, I walked up to him and I said, I'm your buddy from Salem. He just laughed. He goes, he was really a pretty good guy, he just laughed. He says, In the 60s, the dance halls were the big things. In the early 70s, they were the big things. And they just died out because all the bands that were playing dance music shifted over to play Vanilla Fudge or cuckoo music that kids couldn't dance to. And so that really phased that out.
Crazy colors everywhere. Lighting down the internet. Faceless people hiding. far away.
And then when we stopped doing the shows, that kind of ruined that. So then Oregon State Fair said, well, you're going to come out here and be with us. So I went out there and I rented an office from them, a space from them at a reasonable rate. And I put all my business out there and ran it out there. All of a sudden I realized that fairs were playing this big money for no-name acts. And what I introduced to fairs was that you can bring a big name act. They're not as expensive as you think they are. So I started bringing big names to fairs, which they hadn't had. In fact, the first fair I did, I brought Jerry Lee Lewis in, which that went great. I brought the Pat Boone family in. I brought a lot of big names in. What I realized when I was doing the dances is there's two groups of entertainers. There's groups who play the East Coast and groups who play the West Coast. And I had exposed those West Coast acts to the West Coast, all the way from Seattle to San Diego. And we made stars out of B.J. Thomas, acts like that had a lot of hits. And I just integrated that concept into fairs. In other words, I call up radio stations and says, who you playing? Who's your request list? I call the record distributing houses in Seattle and say, who's selling? Who's getting played? And what record labels are spending money on them? And with that formula, it worked. Because I found out if people were buying their album, listening to them on, they knew who they were. So I could take an act that wasn't a big deal nationally and bring them here, and we'd sell tickets because people wanted to see them. But that's how I got started in the fair business, and then I branched off. And at one time when we were doing, I think, 30 fairs, all the way up to Linden, Washington, Canadian border, all the way down to San Diego, did that fair. Tons of fairs in between. Furthest east we ever went with did the Spokane Fair a number of years. Also did Boise, the Boise Big Bear in Boise. I counted up one year, and counting the number of shows that we did that one year. Now, you sell one band to a fair for a week, and they do like 6 shows a week on that stage. We were doing over 800 shows a year, if you added all the shows up. So it got to be quite a few shows going.
He was, very proud that he had something to do with our early career. And then when things all settled down and then all the flame dimmed, we were out on the road doing festivals and fairs, and here was Ed again. And he was the guy who was the buyer for fairs all over the Northwest, even down to California, but clear up to Alaska. And so he would put us on all these fairs in the summertime. And it was wonderful because these are the people that was kids came to see us when they were kids. Now they were adults and they were coming to see us with bringing their children to see us. And so now we've been around so long, now it's their grandchildren that they come to bring to see us when we play a state fair or a county fair or whatever. But Ed, he's always been a big part of our life because, the early dances at the Armory, and then he became the buyer and promoter for all these, he bought all the entertainment for just a large amount of fair in Idaho, Oregon, Washington, all over.
Big doings.
Oregon State Fair.
Big doings.
Come for the fun.
Big doings.
With the best of Oregon.
Gotta get to Salem, gotta see it all. Gotta see the critters, they're the best show of all. Good food, big stars, big doings in Salem. Come for the fun, stay for the show. Oregon State Fair. Let's go.
What we did is we moved the entertainment from away from the front of the fairgrounds that faced east, and we moved it to the armory because we didn't have to wait for stages to move. We didn't have to worry about the weather. And one of the first shows that I did, it seems like this was done in the armory, but it says a grandstand. This is one of the first shows that Howard asked me to put together, and we'd put it together, and we sold it out twice. But the armory only seats, what, 3,400. And it worked pretty well. And then we continued to do it in the armory, but the problem was it only seated 3,400, and we needed more seats. So we built a stage out on the west side of the grandstand, and that was the new stage, and they put benches in front of it, and that probably seated about 10,000 people. Then we started bringing in pretty good acts. A lot of the up-to-date stuff, like Merle Haggard and the Osmonds, and the stuff that was really popular at the time and up-tempo. And we packed that place. A lot of Johnny Cash. This area, they loved Johnny Cash. So we tried to bring him in at least every 3 or 4 years. Just a bunch of people that we exposed at the armory in the late 50s and 60s, so people who knew who they were. And of course it was free. When we built that stage out on the west side of the grandstand, it was free. You got it. If you paid admission to get in the fair, you got in the show, it's free. But it turned out it wasn't enough. And we got pictures showing out the overflowing of that area into the midways and into the carnival areas. I remember when we had the Oak Ridge Boys, Elvira was #1. And when they sang Elvira, everybody on the fairgrounds sang Elvira. You could hear it come from the carnival, from the barns, everywhere, because everybody knew who Elvira was. And so we moved it out there then. Went to Japan and discovered an auditorium over there they said was Universal. So when I went over there, when the city sent a bunch of us over there, they sent me over there with 20 kids. We put a singing group together, and we went over there and we spent a week, and we did like 12 concerts in Japan, playing colleges, high schools, auditoriums. And that's where the concept for this auditorium came. I took a bunch of pictures, came back, Dwight Butt was there, showed them to him. He brought the architects in, and that's where this thing came from. It was an amphitheater in Japan. I don't know how many acts got on that stage and would say, "Thanks, Ed." They'd point over towards the armory and says, "I remember when we played that." And say they went from the armory to the fair. That was kind of neat. That transition was kind of neat. I remember one show with John Denver. I got a call the day before. I need 50 stagehands. Well, John, we can do it with 12. He wants 50 stagehands or else he's not coming. Okay, we're giving him 50 stagehands. Didn't need to, ran the bill way up, but we're sold out. And so he'd been here in Salem rehearsing at the Armory. We brought him in to rehearse at the Armory. I did a show with him here too. So I kind of knew him, and I thought, there's a problem. So when he finally got to town, I got his road manager out there. I said, "Okay, what's going on?" They said, "We showed up in the Paul last night. There was no stage, there was no dressing room, there was no food, and everything got there an hour for the show. So the show was 2 hours late. He was mad, everybody was mad, so we took it out on you." Great. But when he got there and we saw we had everything he wanted, he came to me, John Denver came to me and said, "You heard about last night?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I want to take all your staff and everybody to dinner after the show." And I said, "Well, that's very nice." So I went out and asked, everybody that was there working the show, about 20 people. John Denver wants to take us to dinner afterwards. And everybody said, "Well, sure, we'll go to dinner with John Denver." So we went down here to the Fish Grotto in Salem. And he just stood up and said, "Sorry, what happened? I had a rough time." And I said, "We understand." So he bought dinner for 20 people. He went out in the kitchen. He tipped every cook $100. He tipped all the waitresses $100. He ordered about every kind of bottle of wine that was on the menu. He likes to taste wines. And we had a great time. Well, the dinner's over with, and the waitress comes up and she says, "Well, you think you're a pretty big deal, don't you? And I'm going, oh, no, no. And he goes, well, no. And I said, where are you going with this? She says, well, we've had other major stars in here. And I said, that's good, but don't crank on John here. I says, and he says, well, who have you had here that's bigger than me? She says, the Trailblazers eat here. And he goes to me, he says, who's the Trailblazers? And I says, yeah, they are bigger than you are, John. And he says, okay. So he walked out the door and he felt good.
Crowded house. They tore up the dressing rooms at the State Fair. I mean, just demolished them. And graffiti and food on the walls. I mean, it was bad. And so he had the state police impound their trucks, and they didn't make it to the next show. So he impounded their trucks until they paid for it and got it all cleaned up, So they went ahead, but their crew and trucks didn't. And so they didn't make it on time to the next show, which, was their fault for doing what they did.
They were always fun. They loved to pull practical jokes. When we had him, one of the board members said, my son is really a fan of them. Can he ride in the car when we pick him up at the airport? I said, sure, because they're fun people. So they go to the airport and they pick him up. And they pick him up, they're fighting. This is what the kid told me. He said they were fighting at the airport and they put him in the back of the van. About halfway to the fairgrounds, they were on the floor in the van back there, just pounding on one another, just beating on one another. He says, I was so embarrassed I didn't even talk to him. And he said they were yelling and screaming and cussing and just yelling. He said, I didn't know what to do. They get to the fairgrounds, pull the van up, door opens. They both get out, shake the hand of the driver. They shake the hand of the kid and said, it's been fun, guys. They put an act on for him. And they didn't get it till after they were out of the van. So they showed up that night to get him and they started laughing at him. And those two guys just said, you really scared us, And they thought, got to do something. And we weren't having any fun. That was fun to do because you guys ate it. You guys believed it. And they thought, okay. And they were always doing, you couldn't believe anything they said. You couldn't, whatever they told you. We were sitting in a bar one time after a show and people walked up and says, you guys look like the Smothers Brothers. They had that guy convinced that they were not the Smothers Brothers. The guy walked away and they laughed. They thought it was funny. Johnny Cash. Everybody said he's a problem. Never had a problem with him. Always did great shows. Lou Robbins, his manager, was a great guy. Never had a problem with Johnny Cash. Well, he does this, this, and this. Never saw that. If he did those things, I never saw it. Oh, we had this reporter from Portland show up to do that AM show with him. They did it at the fairgrounds the day of his show in the morning. And we filmed it right on the stage where the show was. And we had an earlier meeting, would you do it? And I had Dwight Butt come in, and so he knew that we said to him, do not bring up anything to Johnny Cash about going to jail or drugs. As far as I know, Johnny Cash never went to jail. He was held one time for an hour because there were some questions. But as far as I know, I never saw him drunk, use drugs. I never saw him as a problem. Anyway, we told him, he said, do not bring that up. Okay, I won't. Because if you are, we're not going to do it. I won't do it. So we meet at 9 o'clock in the morning for that AM show. And John, I had to go get Johnny. Picked him up in the car. He came and took him on stage. This interviewer said, Johnny Cash, you're here tonight? Yeah. Second question out of his mouth, how much time did you do in jail? Johnny Cash looked at me and I went, I told him not to do that. And he said, I did none. That's not true. I didn't do any time in jail. And he kept dwelling on the drug thing and the jail thing. And Johnny was very, very nice about it and finally ended it. But before he left, this interviewer gave him a T-shirt of him with his picture on the front of it. And Johnny just kind of held it in his hand. We put him in the car. We're driving about Market Street to the hotel. And as we got about halfway out there, he was sitting in the front seat. The window came down, and this T-shirt went out the window. Window went back up. Lou said, "Sorry about that, Johnny." He said, "Kind of wish the guy was in the car because I'd have thrown him out after the T-shirt." And I said, I told him not to do it. He said, "I know you're young. When you're going to learn that don't trust the press. Don't trust TV guys, radio guys." He says, "They'll do anything to get their name out there." And I said, "Well, I got used. I'm sorry." And he said, "Forget it." And that was the last of it. It really torqued him off that the guy would stab him in the back that way. We knew that Chuck Berry was a hard person to live with. And a friend of mine in town, Neil Merrill, said, "Let's bring him in." I said, "You want to partner with me?" And he said, "Sure." I said, "Now, you know, we can call all the places he's played. He's always been a problem. He's got this hang up about a certain amp he's got to have. And he knows there none of them around. But we happen to have Cascade Sound here in town. Larry Carroll, who has all the right stuff. So Larry brought it over, so we had it. And he saw it and he says, "Well, that's not the one I use." I said, "Well, that's what's in your rider. That's what you want to use." He said, "Well, I'm not going on. You got to give me another $1,000 bucks." And it turned into pretty sticky. And I gave him a check for $1,000 bucks. And he took it and went on. And I had Johnny Lynn with the lug nuts back him up, and he was real mean to him, just mean to him.
I think probably the first thing that happened that night was that he stopped the show after maybe one song and decided that his amps weren't pointed quite the right direction. So we had to move them maybe 3 inches, and then he was happy with that. So we thought, well, this is going to be some night. We better be careful, with what's going on. Probably another 2 or 3 songs into the set, he stopped the show, turned around, and hollered for the stage manager and said, "I don't play another song unless you get me a new drummer." I mean, it was just devastating for a drummer, especially, who had been playing for him 3 times already. And they had even talked and been like buddies, kind of, and for whatever reason, he decided he didn't like the way our drummer was drumming that night, and he stopped the show, literally. And the strange thing about that is they pulled a drummer who had played in the band just before us, who was in the beer garden having a couple of beers, pulled him out of the beer garden and said, "Do you want to play drums for Chuck Berry?" And he got up there and he didn't. He was scared to death. He was a country act drummer. Doesn't mean he couldn't drum rock and roll, but that wasn't what he knew. And he played, and Chuck was just fine with that, just had no problem. But, I mean, it was just one horror after. And then I think during that show also, he stopped it again, and he doesn't allow, in his contract, it has, there will be no pictures taken, no videos of me performing. And there was a lady out in the audience who was taking pictures, and the flashes, on about the 3rd flash, he stopped the show again and said, "I don't play another song until that person with the camera brings it up here." And so the show stopped, and by that time the audience was just, they were kind of like booing him. They had enough of this guy, no matter how big a hit he was, how many songs he'd written, they were done with him, But he took the film out of the lady's camera and let her take the camera back, and he said, "Okay, now we can keep playing." And so he finally got through and left there, and said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I've already done it." They said, "What'd you do?" I said, "I canceled the check." And they go, "Well, he'll get upset about that." And I said, "Well, he's gone. He's not even in town anymore." Sure enough, the union called me a couple of days later and said, "You can't do that." And I said, "You know what he does and what he is. Now, you want to take that to court, or what do you want to do with it?" Never heard about it again, ever. It was interesting because the number one question asked to me was, what do these entertainers do before a show?
Well, they're backstage talking. They bring their bands, they bring their wives, their kids, and they're no different than anybody else. They're living day to day on those buses or flying. I mean, you get up in the morning, you go to your bus. A lot of them go to the airport, get on a plane, fly to the next town. But you pretty much live on buses, hotel rooms, fairgrounds. You get the opportunity to eat a lot of good fair food. And you know what? We catered for them, and a lot of them would rather eat fair food because they were tired of eating backstage food. It was good food, but they wanted a Pronto Pup, or they wanted a hot dog, or they wanted a, and they would ask, would you go out and get us just some fair food? I said, come on. A lot of the vendors would give it to them. They just, you know, you walk up and you were Vince Gill and some of those guys, they'd say, you know, we just want some fair food. And they'd give it to them because they were asking for it, and then they invite them backstage. And I had one vendor from Newport one time bring over a ton of seafood because he wanted to meet Smothers Brothers. He called and said, can I meet Smothers Brothers? Can I bring a bunch of seafood over? And I said, sure. He brought over oysters and shrimp and put a big buffet backstage for him. The bands went nuts. They never had anything like that in their life. There are people on the road. A lot of them are bored. Entertainers prove that money doesn't make you happy. A lot of them are not happy, but they're doing what they can do. And I saw that with a lot of groups that they were very wealthy, but a lot of them aren't very happy. And that was interesting to watch and observe because, you know, someone, if you're led to believe you're going to have all the money you want, you can have anything you want. Well, those people, most of them, it's not true. Got to know a lot of them. And they had a lot of problems. There were a lot of problems. And the problems had to do with money, alcohol, drugs. They just didn't know how to handle it. I had no show experience when I got into this. I was a school teacher, bartender, teaching at the penitentiary, selling sporting goods for Meyer and Frank. I had 4 jobs. And that was my lifeline. And I lived on a farm where we milked cows and fed hogs. To get in show business was very interesting to see these different lifestyles. You know, I sit outside of many dance halls tearing tickets for $1 and $1.25 over a lot of years. And when someone asked me what I did, I said, well, I ran entertainment. But basically it would be tear tickets, or Jan would sell tickets, I'd tear tickets. And after it's all over with and done, it was a fun way to do it. Met a lot of people, met a lot of jerks, met a lot of people who are phonies, but it was fun to do.
I say he knew stuff that he just kind of, and he just had always kind of a sparkle, kind of a laughter with him, right? So you know, he stood out, you know, among other promoters.
He was very important in the early '60s to give bands a break, and gave us a chance to have the radio stations in the Northwest become aware of whatever songs that we were trying to promote, or new records that we had out.
It was a really unique operation in that at that time, from about 1964 to about 1970, there was really nobody else in the state doing what he was doing, and very few others in the Northwest. And so consequently, he was able to attract huge acts that these days would never even think about stopping in Salem, Oregon.
I mean, just he brought in everybody. I mean, it was kind of the mecca for. It was really a great thing for Oregon. I mean, he put Oregon on the map as far as rock and roll went, and Salem itself. I mean, every Friday and Saturday he had something for the kids going on, and the VFW hall would be just. Obviously, there were less people in those days, but I mean, the place was always packed. It was a place for the kids to go, And then when that was over, they'd go cruising in the gut. And so it was cruising the gut and EJD Enterprise. That's what it was. And for the community, it was the best thing that ever happened to Salem for many, many, many years.
The kids always had music. You don't know what that happened behind with the money and stuff, but the kids always had live music. You know, you'd have a football game on Friday night, and then you go to the dance on Saturday night. EJD presents.
I wish that I could go back and relive all those times again. They were, the best, and it'll never happen again. I feel kind of bad for the young kids growing up. They don't have EJD like we did.
Riding down the highway, thinking about the rainy days I had with you. Looking at the seashore, thinking about the rainy days I had with you. Today it made me happy when I asked how it was with you. You said it was okay. You said it was okay. Today it made me happy when you looked up, drank the rain, but you said it was okay. You said it was okay. And it was and it is a very nice thing to do on a rainy day. A rainy day. Looking at the seashore, thinking about those rainy days I had with you. Today it made me happy when there wasn't much to say, but you said it was okay. You said it was okay. And it was and it is a very nice thing to do on a rainy day. A rainy day. Riding down the highway, thinking about the rainy days I had with you. You.